Thank you, Tramita, and welcome everybody to this virtual press conference on who represent community health workers who have come together in this global moment to launch a set of demands for the rights of community health workers. PSI has been working for a number of years now to address the rights of the most precarious workers within public healthcare, and community health workers are clearly amongst the most precarious, because in a number of countries in South Asia, but also in parts of Southeast Asia, in parts of Africa, women are delivering critical parts of the healthcare system without being recognised as workers, without the right to a wage, without the right to a pension, without the right to key occupational health and safety protection, and without the right to professional development that is critical for a functioning public healthcare system. And in the context of COVID, of course, that has become more apparent than ever, that our public health is dependent on the exploited labour of women, whether they be community health workers or other workers within the health system, or whether they be people working in aged care or other parts of the health supply chain. And in this context, we've brought together unions from Nepal, from Pakistan and India, who share a range of demands. Some are different, of course. There are different, there's a different level of recognition in some countries where, for example, in Pakistan, women have been able to unionize and demand the right to at least a wage and recognition. And they've been providing support to the community health workers in India and in Nepal, and inspiring them to do the same. But all of those unions have come together to develop this set of demands. So in this press conference, we will hear from workers. We will hear from them around the demands that they face, both in their general working lives, as well as in the context of COVID, and the role that they've played so far, as well as the role that we expect to see them play in the continuing fight to eradicate the virus. We'll also hear from key experts in the field, so the former Special Rapporteur on Health. We will hear from experts from the ILO, the International Labour Organization, and as well as PSI's General Secretary.
PSI के General Secretary भी
परंतु
try
जो विश्व स्वास्थ्य संगठन
to
सुरुको लागि चाहिँ हामी के गरौँ भने
Rosa Pavanelli, and Rosa will be speaking about the reasons that PSI decided to prioritise organising the most precarious health workers across this region and across the world. So I'll hand over to Rosa.
Thank you very much, Kate. Good afternoon to everyone, and thanks for inviting me to this press conference and to the launch of this important campaign. As Kate said, we decided a few years ago to focus on the possibility for PSI to contribute to formalize the work of informal workers in areas that are very much close to the area of public services. And community health workers is the closest that we could see for us.
आरोग्य कर्मचारी आहेत आणि विशेष करून ज्यांना स्वयंसेविका म्हणून म्हणले गेले अशा काही
several reasons because PSI decided to prioritize this area of work. The first is that we are very much committed in reducing the gap, the wage gap, the rights gap between women and men. And community health workers are mainly women, and working on the possibility to formalize their relationship with the public administration, with public authorities in the sector of health was one of the contributions that we could give to enhance the quality of working conditions for thousands of women in Asia, in Africa, and other areas of the world as well. Second reason is that we all know, and this pandemic has shown how tragic is the scarcity, the lack of health professionals around the world. No country has been able to keep on treating patients with the ratio of professionals that would have been necessary. And we all know that the international organization, first of all, the World Health Organization, the WHO, are very much relying on the possibility of community health worker to be included within the number of health professionals that can provide primary care. And for us, it was not just to recognize the work that these ladies do since long time ago, but it was also to establish policies, international labor standards and professional standards that could help define training, professionalize the work these women develop in many areas. And third, also recognizing the rights that all workers are entitled, and therefore formalize their relationship with the authorities. The other reason is that we consider, and again, the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted this situation, that primary care are essential filter to reduce the pressure on hospitals and emergency care in situation of epidemic or pandemic as the one we are all living. But not only that, just providing the primary care that a population need everywhere around the world. And community health workers normally serves the most remote areas, the rural areas, and the population that are more disadvantaged with less possibility to access quality services. Therefore, training them, recognizing the work they do, giving them all the means that are necessary is fundamental to provide primary health care. And we saw that if health situations are not considered, are neglected in an area, they can turn into a danger for all the humanity, as this COVID pandemic is making evident. Of course, what we want is that community health workers can enjoy all the protection that
A community has worker
सुरक्षित वातावरणामध्ये काम
है, अधिकारों के संरक्षण है,
from personal equipment, personal protection equipment. They have been called soldiers by some governments, but they have been sent to the front without shields, without weapons, without anything to protect themselves. And of course, this can turn out to be a disaster, not only for their conditions, for their lives, but also for all the people they get in contact with. Now that the world is starting talking about a mass vaccine campaign against COVID, it becomes even more necessary to include community health workers within the health professional that the WHO is dealing with, the ILO have to deal with to ensure international recognition, international labor and professional standards, and therefore the means for government to regulate the working conditions of these healthcare professionals. I leave it here and I give back the floor to my colleagues, but I will be here if any questions is requested. Thank you.
Thanks, Rosa. I do see hands up already, but I might just wait to take those questions until we have a couple of the speakers who are community health worker representatives. And then I'll come to the floor, but please continue to put your hand up if you would like to ask a question, or put a question in the chat box if you would prefer. And we will ensure that we get to all questions later. So now we will hear from the community health workers, starting with India, where we're going to hear from Yamuna Tekan. She is a representative of the Nagpur Municipal Corporation, the employees union. So working as a community health worker in Nagpur, and she'll be talking about the experience that she has in this period of a pandemic, and we'll be using interpretation for her. So please, Yamuna, I'll hand over to you.
हेलो हेलो हेलो, आवाज आ रही है क्या?
यमुना जी, आपकी आवाज आ रही है।
हाँ, गुड आफ्टरनून मैम। मेरा नाम यमुना टेकाम है। मैं नागपुर से हूँ और 4 साल से आशा वर्कर में काम कर रही हूँ। तो हमारा कोरोना का ऐसा अनुभव है
ड्यूरिंग द कोविड,
कोरोना के समय जब सब लोगों को बताया गया था कि आप घर में रहो, घर के बाहर मत निकलो, ऐसे समय में हमें घर से भी ऐसा प्रेशर था कि आप भी कहीं मत जाओ, आप भी घर में रहो। और हमारे सेंटर से ऐसा प्रेशर था कि आपको काम करना ही है, अगर नहीं करेंगे तो आप राजीनामा दे दीजिए, हम आपके बदले दूसरी आशा ले लेंगे। और ऐसे कश्मकश में हम फिर भी हमने घर के लोगों से लड़ झगड़ के काम करने के लिए तैयार हो गए। तो हमें जिस एरिया में, जैसे नागपुर का जो सबसे बड़ा हॉटस्पॉट एरिया था सतरंजीपुरा, जहाँ से कोरोना की शुरुआत हुई थी, ऐसी एरिया में हमें भेजा गया। वहाँ हमें बिना पीपी किट के सिर्फ हमें मास्क दिया गया था, कभी ग्लोव्स मिलते थे, कभी नहीं मिलते थे। ऐसी एरिया में हमने काम किया। उसमें भी लोगों ने हमें इतना परेशान किया कि कोई मतलब कोई गाली दे रहा था, कोई हमारे जो फॉर्मेट लिखने के थे वो फाड़ के फेंक रहे थे, कोई आशा वर्कर लोगों पे तो पानी फेंका गया। और इतना सब कुछ होने के बाद भी हमने जैसे मतलब जो और अदर एरिया में जो आशा वर्कर थे उनको किसी को गाली दी गई, किसी के शरीर पे पानी, आंख पे पानी फेंका गया, फॉर्मेट फाड़े गए। इतना सब कुछ होने के बाद भी हमने सर्वे किया, मगर हमारे ये सब करते समय हमारी कुछ आशा वर्कर लोग पॉजिटिव भी हो गई, बाकी सेंटर की भी हुई है, और हमारी सेंटर की भी 3 लोग पॉजिटिव हो गए थे। उसमें से एक आशा वर्कर की ऐसी पूरी कंडीशन आ गई थी कि उसमें उनके दोनों बच्चे, उनके पति सब पॉजिटिव हो गए थे। और घर में कमाने वाला कोई नहीं, उनमें उनको जो कुछ भी मतलब बाहर से मंगवाना पड़ता था, लोगों के हाथ से मंगवाना पड़ता था, कोई लाके देता था,
they had
कोई
to
नहीं।
get everything from outside.
ऐसे इसने उनके पति की तबीयत भी बहुत ज्यादा हो गई और वो उनकी डेथ भी हो गई। और एक आशा वर्कर थी हमारे सेंटर की, उसको वो भी सर्वे करते करते सर्वे करने का काम कर रही थी, सर्वे से आते आते उसका एक्सीडेंट हो गया, वो उसकी भी ऑन द स्पॉट डेथ हो गई, मगर उन्हें भी मतलब कुछ भी सहायता नहीं मिली गवर्नमेंट के तरफ से। और पेपर में भी कहीं पढ़े थे कि वो कोई आशा वर्कर है, उसको भी एरिया में काम करते करते इतनी परेशानी हुई कि उसने मतलब फिनाइन पी के अपनी जान देने की कोशिश की, मगर जल्दी हॉस्पिटल पहुंचाने के कारण वो बच गई। और इतना सब कुछ होने के बाद भी मैडम कि हमें जो रोजी बोले गए थे कि हम आपको 200 रुपये रोजी मिलेगी, वो तो नहीं मिली। हमें सिर्फ 30 रुपये रोजी के हिसाब से सिर्फ 1000 रुपये महीना दिया गया, और ना पीपीए किट दी गई, और कुछ भी नहीं, मतलब कुछ भी जो हमने सहायता थी वो कुछ भी नहीं दी गई। ऐसी कंडीशन में हमने सर्वे की। तो हमारी बस यही मांगे कि जिस तरह से आप डॉक्टर लोग हो गए, नर्सेस हो गए, उनकी जैसी पहचान है, वैसी हमारी भी पहचान होनी चाहिए। शासन ने हमें भी ऐसी कोई पहचान देना चाहिए। और जैसे भी हम कोई काम कर रहे हैं, हमें फ्री पीपी किट के साथ काम करने भेजना चाहिए, और हमारे काम का सही मुबदला हमें मिलना चाहिए। बस मैम। हेलो।
Thank you.
हाँ।
Thank you. That was
Thank you, ma'am.
really an extraordinary experience to share, and we really appreciate the fact that workers have really been battling at the front lines, and clearly this is evidence of why they have decided to come together and make these demands. So just for any journalists that are covering the not from India, that I should have perhaps announced earlier that ASHA is the term for community health workers in India. And now we will move to Pakistan, where community health workers are usually called lady health workers, and their experience is a little different in that they've been able to unionise and have achieved the right to be recognised as public sector health workers, at least entitled to a minimum wage, although have often struggled to be paid that wage, regardless of the fact that they are in fact entitled now to a wage and also recognised as a union. So we will hear from Halima Zukarman. She's the president of the All Sind Lady Health Workers and Employee Union, and she's been instrumental in organising community health workers in Pakistan and has been able to achieve their registration and their recognition as public sector workers. So Sister Halima, will hand over to you.
हेलो, अस्सलाम वालेकुम। मैं हलीमा लगारी जुल्करनैन, सेंट्रल प्रेसिडेंट ऑल सिंध लेडी हेल्थ वर्कर एंड एम्प्लॉयज यूनियन। पाकिस्तान में हमारे जो लेडी हेल्थ वर्कर है उनकी तादाद 1 लाख से ज़ायद है, और तकरीबन ये प्रोग्राम हमारा जो
health worker are more than 100,000
था, और इस प्रोग्राम का जो मकसद था वो माँ और बच्चे की सेहत को महफूज और बेहतर बनाना, और जो देहात के इलाके हैं वहाँ पे जो फैमिली प्लानिंग की सोच होती है रिवायती, उसको मुस्बत तब्दील करना और उसके लिए काम करना और आबादी को कंट्रोल करना, ये प्रोग्राम का मकसद था। और 1994 में जब अपॉइंट हुए तो हमारी तनख्वाह जो थी वो बिल्कुल कम थी, थोड़ी थी, 900 रुपये हमारी तनख्वाह थी, और हालात ऐसे थे कि ना हमें हॉस्पिटल में कोई इंसान के तौर पे ट्रीट करता था, ना कम्युनिटी में जो है लोग हमारी सपोर्ट करते थे, और हम बहुत ही मुश्किल से जिंदगी गुजार रहे थे। हमें जैसे अछूत की तरह समझा जाता था। इसमें बेसिकली जो खानदान खानदान की कम पढ़ी लिखी औरतें थी। तो हमारे लिए मसले मसाइल बहुत ज्यादा थे, लेकिन हमने इन मसले मसाइल में भी अपने लिए सोचा और हमने सोचा कि हालात हमेशा एक जैसे नहीं रहने, हमें अपने लिए जद्दोजहद करनी है। फिर हमने 2008 में बाकायदा अपनी जद्दोजहद का आगाज किया, जिसमें हमने धरने दिए, मुजाहरे किए। इन धरनों और मुजाहरों में हम पे लाठी चार्ज हुआ, हम पे शीलिंग हुई, हम पे वाटर कैनन इस्तेमाल किया, हमें जो है अरेस्ट किया, दहशतगर्दी के एक्ट हम पे लागू हुए, हम जेलों में गए, जिसके नतीजे में हमारी कुछ लेडी हेल्थ वर्कर जो है उनके मिसकैरेज हो गए, उनके बच्चे जो है वो ज़ाहिर तशद्दुद की वजह से
Have we lost the interpretation, or have we lost Sister Halima?
Sorry, Kate. I think we have lost Sister Halima. She had a very poor internet connection. Kate, if you can hear me.
If we've lost Sister
sorry?
Halima, we might need to come back to her later.
हेलो आई एम सॉरी, नेट का मसला हो गया था। असल में यहाँ पे नेट का बड़ा प्रॉब्लम है, क्योंकि मैं गांव में रहती हूँ। तो मैं आपको बता रही थी, काफी जो हमारी लेडी हेल्थ वर्कर है उनके साथ ये हुआ कि वो हामला थी, तो धरनों में तशद्दुद की वजह से मिसकैरेज हो गए। काफी LHW को तलाकें हो गई, क्योंकि वो 2-2, 3-3 रातें जेल में रहकर आई थी। तो ये मसले मसाइल थे, और मसले मसाइल तो अभी भी चल रहे हैं। लेकिन जो ताज़ा सूरत हाल है कोविड-19 की, इसमें हमारी लेडी हेल्थ पर को बहुत ज़्यादा जो है वो मसले और मसाइल हैं। उनको जो है इस टाइम गवर्नमेंट का ये कहना है कि लॉकडाउन है, घरों में बैठो, तो हमारी लेडी हेल्थ वर्कर फ्रंट लाइन पे काम कर रही है, और उनको जो है घरों में जाके माँ और बच्चे की सेहत के बारे में भी बताना पड़ता है, हेल्थ एजुकेशन भी देनी पड़ती है, और उनको जो है हेल्थ के बारे में काम, वैक्सीनेशन, पोलियो के कतरे देने होते हैं। तो जब ये लोग घरों में जाते हैं तो लोग घरों में आने नहीं देते, और उनको कोविड के नाम से पुकारते हैं, उनको कोरोना कोरोना कह के चिढ़ाते हैं, और उनको बोलते हैं कि आप इतने घरों में वैक्सीन पिला के आ रही हैं, तो आप अपने साथ जो है वो जरासीम लेकर आ रही हैं, और ये जो पोलियो की वैक्सीन है ये कोविड के जरासीम है जो आप दे रही हैं, और गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से जो है हमें कोई फैसिलिटी नहीं है। और हमारी जो लेडी हेल्थ वर्कर है दूसरी कम्युनिटी वर्कर से ज्यादा जो है वो मसाइब का शिकार है, क्योंकि दूसरे लोग रेगुलर बेसिस पे लोगों के घरों में कम्युनिटी में नहीं जाते, लेकिन हमारी लेडी हेल्थ वर्कर जो है डेली बेसिस पे जा रही है, अपने काम कर रही है। तो ना हमें मास्क दिए जा रहे हैं, ना हमें सेफ्टी किट दी जा रही है, ना ही हमें जो है ये लोग कोई ऐसा फूड प्रोवाइड कर रहे हैं जिससे हमारी इम्यूनिटी बढ़े, ना ही ये लोग हमें कोई ऐसी मेडिसिन दे रहे हैं, ना सैनिटाइजर है, हमें कोई भी हिफाजती चीज जो है वो ये लोग नहीं फराहम कर रहे हैं, जबकि हम फ्रंट लाइन पे अपनी जान खतरे में डाल के काम कर रहे हैं। और तकरीबन हमारी 22 से ज्यादा, सिर्फ मेरी जो लेडी हेल्थ वर्कर है उनकी कोरोना पॉजिटिव आई है। तो जाहिर है हम काम कर रहे हैं तो हम 24 घंटे खतरे में काम कर रहे हैं। ये कोविड की सूरत हाल है, तो गवर्नमेंट से जाहिर है हमारी ये अपील है, और मीडिया के थ्रू भी हम ये अपील करेंगे कि हमारे इस मसले को उजागर किया जाए, और हमें गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से ऐसा फूड प्रोवाइड किया जाए जिससे हमारे, और हमें ऐसी मेडिसिन दी जाए, और हमें टोटल सेफ्टी किट दी जाए, जिसकी हिफाजती किट के जरिए हम जो है कम्युनिटी में जाएं, और मीडिया वाले हमारे लिए ये करें कि इसके जो है प्रोग्राम, जैसे इलेक्ट्रॉनिक मीडिया है, प्रिंट मीडिया है, और जो सोशल मीडिया है, उस पे हमारे लिए ऐसी मुहिम कैंपेन चलाएं ताकि लोग हमें इज्जत से घरों में आने दें, और हम जो है अपना काम सही तरीके से करें। हम उनके फायदे के लिए ही घरों में जाते हैं। और अभी हमारे मसले मसाइल काफी हैं, जिसमें अभी तक हमारी सर्विस स्ट्रक्चर जो है वो नहीं बना, हमारी सीनियरिटी काउंट नहीं हुई है, हमारे जो लेडी हेल्थ वर्कर मर गई हैं, शहीद हो गई हैं, उनको कोई मुआवजा वगैरह नहीं मिला, उनके बैक बेनिफिट नहीं मिले, और जो रिटायर मुलाजिम हैं उनको कुछ भी नहीं मिला। तो ये सारे मसले मसाइल जो हैं हमारे साथ हैं, तो ये मीडिया वाले ही हमारी हेल्प कर सकते हैं और हमारी गवर्नमेंट को चाहिए कि वो कोविड-19 में हमें जो है भरपूर सपोर्ट करे ताकि हम बेहतर से बेहतर काम करें। आप सबका शुक्रिया।
Thank you, Sister Halima. I think the situation in Pakistan is really illustrative for the rest of the world because as Sister Halima mentioned, they are still delivering the polio vaccine, which most of the world has eradicated, and the difficulty they have just to deliver that vaccine, particularly to the most remote areas, is actually life-threatening for the workers. And we won't be able to eradicate the current virus unless those workers are properly protected and respected and given the support that public health workers require. So we will now move on to our speakers from Nepal, who have taken inspiration from the work that our affiliates have done in Pakistan. We have two speakers from Nepal who will share their experiences. And sorry, I'm just trying to find them. Maybe I can see them on the list here.
Kate,
Sorry, Sister Geeta.
Yes.
Sister Geeta Thing from the Nepal Health Volunteers Association will be speaking next. Sister Geeta, you can go ahead. Namaste.
मेरो नाम गीता थिङ म
गीता थिङ and
एउटा सेवा पुर्याउँदै
working in ward number 16 in our municipality as a female community health volunteer. And when I joined this female community health volunteer since last 28 years, and I have been continuously delivering my service. Before I joined as a female community health volunteer, I was working as a social worker because my aim was to serve to the society one or the other way. So I was joining small associations, but when I was working there as a social worker, then people recognize me because I used to visit different community as a social worker to fight for the rights of the women and also for the social service. That time, the community health volunteers program was just started. At that time, the community volunteers were deployed to the different villages because that was just the beginning of this initiation, but mostly it was deployed in the rural area, not in the urban area, where the community health volunteer has to move from one place to another place, one house to another, one village to another, where community volunteers were the first person to reach to the household level and visit the family. And we had to do a lot of awareness raising program to reduce the maternal and child mortality rate. So we had to do a lot of work. So many community health volunteers were already doing such kind of things. So I was really inspired to join as a community volunteer, health volunteer, and wanted to contribute. So whatever government give, run the campaigns, for example, different, vaccination campaign, immunization campaigns, where the female community health volunteers were very much engaged. Sometimes I have seen the community health volunteers not just, distributing the vitamin A or the tabloids, but sometimes they had to handle the delivery case, where there is no health facility, there is no institutional delivery system. That time when the community health volunteers used to visit the household, and sometimes even in the health center, the health personnel, health officials were absent, but delivery could happen at any time, even at night time. So it was the female community health volunteers who used to always call at first, not only for the delivery, even
इसीलिए लेडी हेल्थ वर्कर को हर वक्त जो
hands. That time doctors were not present there. It was only the female community health volunteers who were called there, and they had a mandate to do that, whether they are expert on those subject matter or not. So I saw female community health volunteers has to do 24/7 duty, because sometimes they were called at midnight if there is any health issue, any accident, any wounded, anything happens. But sometimes the family members themselves resist that, why you are traveling at midnight since you are not getting paid or not well recognized. And not only that things, family pressure was on the other side, but the geographical situation and the weather condition was very, very worse. We have a number of cases when the female community health volunteers were traveling from one village to another at midnight, then there was a heavy flood, and some of the community volunteers were swept away by the river due to the flood. So many people ask, what you are being paid, what you get out of doing these things, and the answer is just basic snacks and basic travel allowance. Government recognize us female community health volunteers, and government and other people say that you are branded as a volunteer, so you should not get paid. That sort of things people say to us, because so many people say that you are a volunteer, but you are the doctors without uniform. Sometimes people recognize us that way too. So it was really heart touching. Then I said, wow, yes, I want to serve the people, because when I was joining as a social worker, before I joined community health volunteer, I had a plan to become a nurse, but somehow I could not fulfill my dream because of my own circumstances. So I could not become a doctor, but I wanted to continue serving to the community, so that I became the community health volunteers. And when government decided to recruit new volunteers, then I wanted to apply, and government also requested me, because I already built my some level of profile, and as a result they asked us to join, and I was also very happy, because it was something that I was looking for anyway. So because government should give some rights or some service when they are working as a volunteers, because government gives so many responsibility to the community health volunteers, but they don't pay in returns of those works. However, we join as a volunteers. Neither they were giving us uniform, nothing in fact. So we have to wear our own clothes and use some our own money to travel from here and there. We just get a brand as a volunteers, because we had a duty to serve to the community in a monetary form. So at least we should ask something. So we realized that, then we formed the organization, and in 2010 we are officially organized, and we slowly claim our rights and benefits, even though we are what we are needing, and our demands are not fully fulfilled, but somehow our campaign is very much visible, and some of the rights have been recognized and ensured. Even though there is a long journey, we are not able to gain what we want, but at least we are somehow happy that government is at least recognizing something. some people claim that, say that you are a volunteer, you should not be treated as a government employee. Otherwise, why should we call you volunteers? But if the government give us so many work and with mandate, then why should not they pay us? Because they are, instead of community volunteers, maybe they should recognize us as a community health workers, because now they are not recognizing us as a community health workers. Instead, they are recognizing us as a community health volunteers. So we are demanding with the government. So we are very happy that we are affiliated with the PSI, and they have been showing us the path. PSI has been showing us a new path, because they are encouraging and inspiring us that you are also a labor, you have been working as a worker, so you should be properly recognized and you should get paid accordingly of your work. So we are very much thankful to PSI that they have initiated to take us up to this level. Thank you so much to PSI, because you have shown us the path, and we
Thank
all
you.
community health volunteers would like to move ahead accordingly. Thank you, PSI.
Thank you, Sister Geeta, for giving that background on the situation in Nepal. And we know that in Nepal, since the start of the Community Health Workers Program, there's been a dramatic reduction in maternal and infant mortality. So clearly, the women that are working and contributing so much to public health are having an enormous impact on the community development and the development of Nepal in general. We might go now to Sister Joitsna Shakya, who's also working as a community health worker in Nepal, perhaps to give us a current context on the situation of workers during the pandemic. And she represents workers from the Health Volunteer Organisation of Nepal, HEVON. Sister Joitsna.
Namaste. As you have all shared, we all work together. We are jointly working. We are two associations working together, and we two associations are working together. And when we were working in Jajarkot, a very remote part of the country, and I was really inspired to work as a female community health volunteers, because my grandmother was a female community health volunteers, and along with my mother. So because my two generations have worked as a female community health volunteers. So one organization gave us a training that the cholera was emerged due to the waterborne disease. So when I was sitting in Kathmandu in ward number 19, people know about the cholera, and people are very much well educated in Kathmandu. Ward number 19 is a place, because it's a hub of the capital of the Kathmandu. So many people know that. I used to stay there, but when I go little bit down nearby my cluster, I saw there was a training happening on the river bank. There was so much slum area, and it is a kind of slaughter, animal slaughter area. So I saw that is this a Kathmandu? Is this a capital city? This is so remote than the remote part of the country. The kids were playing around, and the women were taking the meat, working on the slaughter house, and they were very much working there, and it was very poor sanitized, because the children of those women were playing around with barefoot and without clothes. And I asked the ward president, then his response was, this is a slum settlement. So it is so when he said that, then what I realized is this program should be targeted to that slum area. But when I started working, all the program that was launched there, because now in the COVID situation, what we were told to the community health volunteers is community volunteers should be mobilized. That was the government's order, and the Minister of Home Affairs also issued an order to form the committee of the 5 members involving the community health volunteers. So that was the circular from the Minister of Home Affairs, but this is not applied, implemented in the local level. So because before lockdown began, we were already making public announcement through the speakers, loudspeakers. So that time, the COVID might happen, you have to do this and that, you have to wear mask, maintain social distance, you have to wash your hands. So whatever knowledge we had, we also did the internet surfing, gather the information, and our group already did the public announcement through the public speakers, loudspeakers. But when the lockdown began, then the government launched the relief distribution program. When it came to the ward level, which is a small unit of the government, and the community health volunteers were totally biased. They were not invited by the local government. They themselves, did the work according to their vested interest. Either that was like the ward president, or they recognize the other local clubs, youth clubs, or others, but they simply ignore or the boycott the female community health volunteers. The experience that we have during the pandemics, because we somehow know what we should do and why should not, what we should do and don't, because we have the experience, because we could not share our expertise for the wash components. But mostly the government is focusing on the relief distribution, not in the health and hygiene issues, because in the relief distribution there is a big number of crowd, where to avoid the crowd they require the female community health volunteers to remove the crowd. But they don't recognize the community health volunteers for other purpose. They only recognize to us to avoid the crowd. But to stop and to prevent the pandemic, to avoid the local people, the female community health volunteers were not very much mobilized. And also when it comes to the RDT test or the PCR test, for that work also, community health volunteers were just assigned to give the collect the informations. Who would like to go for PCR or RDT, and we have to only give the name. That was the only responsibility that government assigned to us. Like RDT test or the PCR test, there's so much crowd, and the volunteers were only called to remove the crowd, because they were saying us that please please tell them, when you say, people will listen you. So only that things was told by us, by the government to us. But federal government say that you should give 1,000 rupees allowance, Nepalese rupees, as an allowance to the volunteers when they are working, but the local government did not give that to us. When we went for the PCR test in Kathmandu metropolitan city, ward number 12, we had a very negative experience, because when we went for the PCR test, almost all the female community volunteers got diagnosed positive, and they were not allowed to go to their own home. So their own family members did not welcome them, because you have been moving here and there, you have been visiting so many other people. So by blaming that way, the family members themselves don't let volunteers in. So the volunteers were very depressed, so they were forced to stay in a community house. And female community health volunteers were also thinking that if I go back to the family, maybe I will also transmit to others, so better not to go my own home. So that way they have to they were forced to think that way. So one of the female volunteer from the ward number 12, one social leader wrote a status on social media. What he told is, when our volunteers are working for the community, I will support you. I would rather die. I won't let the volunteers to die. So this is how some community people, some leaders were supporting to us, to our work. So when we volunteers, female volunteers, were asking for the mask, gloves, sanitizers to the municipality office, but they are not providing such basic PPE to us. Then we are asking for very basic, but none of the volunteers are getting in a sufficient numbers. So when we were very much in need of these things, when there was a lockdown, people were afraid to come out from the house. That time, the community health volunteers were visiting different places without any safety equipments, without any safety measures. Even the situation is the same now, even though lockdown is not in the country, but we two organizations, NEVA and Heaven, are collectively working together, and we are raising our voice, with unity. So we have, submitted our joint demand paper. These are the list of things that we are needing and we require to perform our duty. So on the occasion of the Community Health Volunteers Day, then these are the needs that we are needing. These are the things that we require, like we need oximeters, because we have to go different houses, and when they have a problem to breathe, and do you have oximeters, please measure our oxygen. So this is how we volunteers are being requested by the family members. That's why we are also demanding we need oximeters. So our mayor now is very positive, and what the mayor has said is, so when you are working, please let us know what are the things that you need. So we'll provide you. So on the day of the female community health volunteers day, mayor has declared that they will provide us those things. We are a bit happy, but still the perception and attitude towards us is not changed at all. They are the volunteers. They don't need anything. They don't need money. They don't need any other support, because they are volunteers. So this is how they treat us. And time and again, we have been demanding for the basic needs. And sometimes we feel very awkward to say that, because sometimes government gives us 1,500 rupees, but they did not give that, but instead they hire other paid volunteers, because the volunteer have a two-way, one is unpaid and one is paid volunteers. So sometimes we don't want to recognize as a volunteers. Why don't they recognize us as a community health workers? Because what they used to call is, we were called as a community health workers, but now we'd like to recognize as a community health workers instead of health volunteer. Because what we felt now is, we don't want to recognize as a volunteer, but instead we would like to be called or to be recognized as community health workers. Because when we recognize as a volunteers, then so many people say that you are a volunteers, you are committed for the service, you cannot claim any benefit. This is how government people say, and also society treat that way. That's why I think we should also change our recognition as a community health worker rather than volunteer. So another thing we'd like to say, that our female volunteers need to have health insurance, because all the health volunteers across the country, we need to have our health insurance. With this, I'd like to end my few words. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Sister Joitsna. And she's started to go through some of the demands that the collective has put together for this campaign. The campaign, which is community health work is work, and we'll be highlighting the collection of demands in a moment. But first, I might ask a couple of our speakers to respond to what they've heard from the workers, from the community health workers from India, Pakistan, and Nepal. First of all, we have Anand Grover, who is a former UN Special Rapporteur on the right to health, on human rights and health, and he has been a prominent advocate for the right to health and for the rights of health workers. And I think in this context of the pandemic, he's done particularly important work around the right to free and affordable medicines, and for a public health system to be adequately resourced, able to serve all people and their right to health, which includes resourcing, of course, the workers that deliver that health system. So I'll hand over to Anand to speak about his perspective on the international human rights standards and why the workers' demands in this context should be given due regard. Anand.
Thank you, Kate. I'm not going to limit my comments only on the right to health as a UN Special Rapporteur, because I have been a lawyer for workers against employers all my life. I've never taken an employer's brief. So for me, the issue and demands of healthcare workers are very dear. I'm very thankful to PSI and the organizers for giving me this opportunity to have a conversation. And I want to first salute Sister Kiran Thakre. मी मराठीमध्ये बोलता है किरण. हलीमा जी आपको सलाम देते हैं. Sister Geeta, Sister Jyotsna, and my friend Susanna and Kate, who I know, and also Bobby and other friends. Nice to see you. First of all, I think I want to situate and contextualize this very important meeting for demands of healthcare workers in the context of the right to health. And very briefly, every person, not only citizens, have the right to health. And briefly, what that means is that every person is entitled to goods, facilities, and services which are available, accessible, acceptable, and of good quality. That means that if a medicine is required, 10 tablets are required, those 10 tablets are available in the country. And accessibility is more important because poor people cannot get it, remote areas cannot get it. So accessibility means it is available geographically as well as affordably. The government
और उनके जेब के मुताबिक मिले.
Health care services, facilities and goods are available, accessible, and of good quality and acceptable also. Moreover, they have the obligation to what is called respect, that they shall themselves not interfere. And that is very important in the context of healthcare workers by not providing adequately for community healthcare workers. And I'm using the word workers. You are not volunteers, you are workers. And I think it's a very important demand by the community of healthcare workers to say that they are workers. I do other work, by the way, and I want to say this. I also work for sex workers. They are also demanding the right to be called workers. Sometimes you should think about that. Are they our workers or not? But that's another issue. I feel that the community healthcare workers are the most important healthcare workers amongst the healthcare workers, not doctors and surgeons. Why? Because the healthcare system, which is required for health care and the right to health, is based on primary health care. If you do not have primary health care, you cannot provide health care at all. And the right to health is not realized. So if a person becomes ill, the person should be able to access a primary healthcare center. And if they can do that, you don't have to go to tertiary hospitals like the All India Institute of Medical Sciences in Delhi. Because we have failed in India and Pakistan and Nepal and Bangladesh, but not in Sri Lanka. And in some states in Kerala, we have good primary healthcare system. And that is the most important. And for the primary healthcare system to work, healthcare workers are the most important. The whole healthcare system rests on the primary healthcare workers. So workers in India, by the way, there are 3 categories of healthcare workers in India who are community healthcare workers. And the government itself actually talks about them. And they are known as accredited social health activists, ASHA, Anganwadi workers or AWW, or auxiliary nurse midwife. So these are 3 categories, and all of them are community healthcare workers. Now, I think the most important issue that has been raised by the speakers is that they are not treated as workers, they are treated as volunteers, or they are told that you are not really workers. Why should you be paid by the government in accordance with the scales of the government? They may not be government workers, but if they are treated as workers legally, then they actually attain a lot of rights. Secondly, I think it's important to appreciate, and the workers appreciate it better than I in the abstract form, that they are not treated with respect or dignity. Halima ji, आपने बताया है, let me just say in Hindi, Halima ji can understand that. आपने बताया है कि आपने कितने
You had told us that
कितने जंग किए हैं आपके हकों के लिए, और अभी भी आप जेल में जा रहे हैं. आपने जो काम किया है वो बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण है, बहुत important. Yeah. So I want to salute all the healthcare workers for the work they're doing, for not only for the community, but for the dignity of their labor, and for the recognition of their dignity and respect. But that is important also for the society as a whole, and the community as a whole. The difficulties they have faced in COVID, and I can tell you from my own experience, I'm part of a group which actually makes sure that protective equipment like PPE, masks, sanitizers are available to healthcare workers, not in the rural areas, but in Mumbai, which has the largest health facilities and very sophisticated facilities, because the government is not making, for example, PPE available. So we have set up a volunteer group to make sure that PPE is available to all healthcare workers within Mumbai and Maharashtra. They have told us, and this is common, that they are treated with disrespect and even assaulted when they go into homes, despite the fact that they are actually taking care of people. They have also told us that they are not paid wages, and wages are pending for a long period of time. These are issues which actually go to the root of the problem, that is, they are not treated as human beings. Halima ji said कि हमें इंसान की तरह बर्ताव नहीं करवाते हैं. We are not treated with respect. That is the sense that one gets when we listen to the healthcare workers. Now, I think the demands that have been made by the collective are very important, and these demands you have actually come up with are in fact the things that you have to move on. But let me tell you, as a lawyer, and now I practice in the High Courts and the Supreme Court, I can tell you, and I'll tell you something good also, these demands are not easily attained, because nothing comes without a fight. As Halima ji has mentioned, you have to struggle for a long time to get even the basic necessities. In Nepal, they are told that you will only get some stipend or meals or snacks. Why should that be? And I can tell you that in South Asia, even domestic workers face the same problem. They are not treated as regular workers, so their wages are less than 10,000. And for the people from outside South Asia, let me tell you what the wages are as we have been told, 1,000 rupees. You know what it amounts to? Is about 8 to 9 pounds a month, UK pounds, GB pounds, or 9 to $10, no, sorry, $12 US dollars per month. How can you survive on that? And with that, they actually carry out the work in a very dignified manner, professionally, and with their heart in the whole thing, with a lot of passion. I've never met a community health worker who doesn't passionately believe in her work. And significantly, the reason why the governments have made sure that they're all women, in fact, the cadre of ASHA are all women by law, is because they can easily discriminate, because they can actually induce this kind of passion without the remuneration that they are entitled to. So we cannot now say that, look, we are going to work as charity. We now have to demand our professional wages, because we are professionals and we are entitled to wages as a professional, and therefore you have to be treated as workers. Now, I don't have much time, but I can tell you that there have been some cases in India, and there's one case from Maharashtra, a Bombay High Court judgment, Vidya versus State of Maharashtra, where an Anganwadi worker, as I told you, there are 3 categories of workers in the community healthcare network: Asha, Anganwadi, and auxiliary midwife. And the Anganwadi worker had gone to court, and she had gone directly to the High Court. So the High Court told her, yes, you are entitled to be treated as a worker under the industrial laws. So please go to the labor court and make your demands. What happened further is not known to me, because there's no text of that. But there are some good moves. So I think in the future, and as a lawyer and as a person who believes in rights of people, of healthcare workers, community healthcare workers, and all workers, I would be willing to help you in any way that is necessary. And Susanna knows me very well. And Susanna only asked me to be on this press conference. Whatever help you need for any legal representation, I'm available. But we will not get anything directly going to court. We have to fight. The people must know, the general public must know that as community health workers, we put our heart out for this work. And in COVID, without PPE, community healthcare workers have gone to treat people, but they are not even paid their wages. They're not even given protective equipment, etc. We are entitled to all those things which are in the demands. I also want to just say this lastly, because time is limited and I don't want to take other people's time. It is very heartening to see that not only people from India alone are here, but people from Pakistan, very particularly Pakistan, because we had a major issue between India and Pakistan, as you know, and from Bangladesh. And I don't know, I didn't see any, sorry, I'm sorry, Nepal. But if you want people from Bangladesh, I can put you in touch with them, and also from Sri Lanka. It's a very good move on the part of PSI and other organizers to make sure that around South Asia, we have comrades and friends who are working for the same rights. The problems of the people of South Asia are common, and problems of all community health workers are common. So we need to join together and not only tell the ILO is also at fault. What have they done about community health care workers in South Asia? I think they need to be taken to task. Everybody, including myself, are accountable. What have I done? You have to ask me, what have you done, Mr. Grover, as the UN Special Rapporteur? I did a lot of communications, but have I done enough? That's why I'm here. We have to make everybody accountable, and that is your right. You have to ask questions, and you have to ask questions throughout South Asia and beyond. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anand. That was, I think, a really important point. We're, of course, going to have the ILO speak about their response to the situation that community health workers are raising. And I think it is really important to highlight the fact that there's solidarity amongst the workers and their unions across the region when, as you said, there's obviously tensions and threats from governments and who are undermining the capacity for solidarity between countries, but also within countries, of course, when at a time when in India in particular, the rights of workers are being significantly undermined. It's more important than ever that workers mobilize and cultivate solidarity and strength and power. As you said, that we're not going to win this without a fight. So it might be, before I ask our colleagues from the ILO to respond. I might just put up this, the demands. I won't go through them, but they're sort of categorized around key areas. So perhaps I could ask my colleague Banani to just share the page. I think I can. And if we scroll down, you'll see, so this is the launch of the campaign and the key demands. And if we scroll down, you'll see that they are categorized under key areas. So first of all, of course, I think we've gone down a bit far. Sorry, Banani, if you could just go back up to the first demand, is the basic recognition as a public health worker, to be recognised, as our speakers have said, as a worker and not as a volunteer. And that from that recognition comes a range of other rights, a recognition in the public, in the labour laws. Secondly, to have a decision to have a voice in decision making. And that relates to all public health decision making as well as around their role. But in the context of COVID, that means that workers, community health workers, should be consulted on the role that they have and around the protections that will be provided to them. Third, we have a range of demands that relate to occupational health and safety, which is important at every moment, of course, for health workers. But in a pandemic, it's really obvious that without occupational health and safety, those workers are at mortal risk, as is the rest, as is the public. So it's not only in relation to PPE, personal protective equipment, but in relation to a broader occupational health and safety protection. And we've been campaigning as PSI to have community health workers be afforded the same level of protection as other health workers, with not just access to basic masks and basic protection, but the level of protection that health workers have. And you heard a number of the speakers talk about the fundamental right to dignity, to be treated with respect, as Sister Halima highlighted, that they have been treated both by the government, of course, the local governments, and sometimes by the community with a lack of respect, which comes from being regarded as a volunteer, but is also part of the overall patriarchal approach to women who deliver care. And we have highlighted the fact that community health workers are delivering public health without being entitled to a fair standard of health, that they should have universal health rights and protection, and that should be afforded to them whilst they're working, but beyond. They should know that they are going to be cared for at all times. And finally, it's important, I think it was highlighted by Sister Geeta perhaps, around the motivation for many community health workers to do this work is actually being motivated by their care for the community and their intention to do good, as all health workers really join the health workforce with an intention to do good. And they have included in their demands the need for a stronger people-centred healthcare system, one that focuses on public healthcare and not profits, one that the government respects the right to health for all people. And they know more than any the the situation that people face in the most remote and rural areas, the fact that many of them can't access healthcare, that many of them rely on community health workers as their only source of health care, and that so they are demanding a fundamental shift to the way that healthcare is prioritised, a shift away from profits and towards public health. And I think that demonstrates the fundamental belief, motivation of solidarity that our sisters who deliver community health care have. So with that, I will now ask the respondents from the International Labour Organization to tell us about a little bit about how the ILO is responding to the demands of community health workers in this pandemic, but also some of perhaps the work that they're doing, which was actually planned prior to the pandemic to address the issues that health and care workers need across the globe. So I'll ask Anna Torriente to start off with her comments.
Good morning, at least good morning from Geneva. I know it's afternoon for you. I want to first start off by thanking very much PSI Kate Lappin for including us in this very interesting exchange. And as I expected, I have learned a lot and I'm hopeful that in future exchanges, we can learn more about the specific challenges that all of you are facing as community health workers. I wanted to just outline, as Kate has said, what we've been working on in the ILO. I am a lawyer in the International Labor Standards Department and responsible for the team that has been asked to prepare a general survey, which is basically a global study of the situation, good practices, problems, challenges in the ILO member states, which of course include India, Nepal, Pakistan, on the topic of decent work for care workers in a changing economy. And as Kate said, yes, we started off at the beginning of 2020, starting to organize this work. We received reports, information from a number of countries around the world. I believe it was about 85 countries so far. And then the pandemic happened and the work was postponed we're going to take this work up again at the beginning of 2021. And of course, the topic of nursing, of care work, of community health work in particular is one that, that we want to address comprehensively because in the context, not to go into the procedure, but for a general survey, the ILO will look at how a certain convention or conventions that we
ILO इस बात का जायजा लेगी कि
as an umbrella, that's the way I like to think of it, to say that we have to use the umbrella of a particular convention or conventions, and then we will go further. And that is the notion that we are going to be looking at decent work for care workers and looking at both the informal economy, formal economy, healthcare workers. We're doing it under the umbrella of our Convention 149, which is the Nursing Personnel Convention. But that convention also applies, for example, to volunteers, and we're using it as an umbrella also to address, obviously, the work of midwives, auxiliary midwives, lay midwives, for example, community health workers. So we're trying to really look at the situation of health workers, care workers, community health workers in all different types of situations so that we can address the needs and the concerns that you have. And for this reason alone, it was very, very useful to us to listen to your experiences. And I hope that we'll be able to do that more, because we want to be able to take your personal experiences into account. Now, I wanted to mention a couple of things. We've been looking at, because we recently also completed another general survey that was about promoting employment and decent work in light of the changes to the world of work brought by globalization, climate change, technological innovations, telework. And as we could not proceed with the work on the decent work for care economy workers study, we proceeded it over the summer to put out an addendum which takes into account the impact of COVID-19 in particular. And there we saw the opportunity to address the situation of health workers, frontline workers, and we included community health workers as a mention. And in addition to the need to address conditions of living conditions, working conditions, which have already been outlined, so I won't go into those in detail, but also we are looking at the issue of equal remuneration between women workers. And it's already been noted that as the majority of community health workers are women, there is a tendency to devalue this work. And so while the Convention 149 doesn't deal specifically with equal remuneration, it's an issue that we want to address and presumably recommend that there are certain updates that could be made in terms of standard setting to squarely address equal remuneration, wages, minimum wages that are. So we're going to be looking at that. A concern that that we have had that is at the forefront of our minds in looking at the living and working conditions of community health workers and health workers in general, including nurses and doctors, is the issue in the context of COVID-19 of stigmatization, xenophobic attacks, discrimination. We've seen and reported on incidents in the addendum that is going to be published at the beginning of the year, taking into account COVID-19, stigmatization of community health workers and other health workers that have been told, don't come back to your community because you've been dealing with COVID patients. Don't, or violent attacks. No, don't come near us. We don't want to be treated by you. So some of these same issues that you voiced today are those that we want to take into account. And just also, I should add that the ILO has a recently adopted convention specifically on the topic of violence and harassment at work. So we're going to be using that as another umbrella, if I can describe it that way, to address some of these issues. I also want to highlight, because you've mentioned the need for having also personal protective equipment, other protections against the risks that community health workers face. And the convention also is accompanied by a recommendation which contains detailed guidelines. And we have been really bringing this to the forefront to countries in the work that we do. Because in paragraph 49 of this recommendation, it talks about the need to take all possible steps to ensure that nursing personnel, but we're also using this to cover health workers, are not exposed to special risks. Well, obviously, in the context of COVID, you are being exposed to special risks. And you were already exposed to to special particular challenges and risks. But this provision is a basis that could inform or support the demands that you're formulating, because it does provide that where the exposure to the risks cannot be avoided. First of all, the exposure should be avoided. If it can't be avoided, then you should be given personal protective equipment, protective clothing, immunization, and also another thing that I don't think we've talked about yet, provisions for leave, shorter hours of work, more frequent rest breaks, longer annual holidays, if the workers are assigned regularly to duties that involve these special risks. So this is an area that could be used perhaps to inform, you know, basically governments of a foundation for your demands. And also there's a provision in paragraph 49 that says that, that personnel who are exposed to special risks should also receive financial compensation for those risks. So these are all issues that we are going to be taking up in, we have already taken it up with governments, because part of our work involves analyzing the application by countries, by governments, of the conventions that they have ratified. And we've been referring in our guidance to these particular provisions. Also, I wanted to mention that the ILO, part of the ILO's response has also been guidelines on which I participated in the formulation. There are guidelines on protection, safeguards for emergency healthcare services. And they provide for protections, PPE, and many other rights, fundamental principles and rights at work that should be extended also to not only to frontline workers such as yourselves, but also volunteer workers that are responding to emergencies such as the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is also a useful guideline. I also would refer you to a brief which we prepared on the health sector that talks about it's COVID-19 and the health sector. And Kate, I can, in whatever way you think might be useful, can share these specific references. And the sectoral brief that we prepared also talks about the importance of the thousands of community health workers that are needed to provide this primary care that Anand Grover referred to as critical for public health, and the need to provide them with adequate protections, adequate living and working conditions to carry out those duties. So that is also a reference. And another thing that we're taking account of, we've also already taken account of it and really visibilized this new standard in our addendum, which is going to be available, as I said, in the beginning of the year, is recommendation 205. It's a labor standard that was adopted in 2017, and it's very, very much at the forefront now. We are really trying to focus on its application by countries in the context of COVID-19, because it's called the Employment and Decent Work for Peace and Resilience recommendation. And it contains specific protections for workers that are in, on the front lines, including volunteers that are emergency responders and that are providing health care. So these are all standards that the ILO has adopted, that are available, that can be cited, that can be relied on. And I wanted to also touch on, just because I know time is short, but in addition to addressing the issue of the wage gap, equality between men and women health workers, compensation for risks, protection against risks such as COVID, and any future crises that, because we can't forget that right now, of course, we're in the middle of a global pandemic, but this this doesn't mean, it's shown the fault lines in our healthcare systems, and the fact that we need to invest in these healthcare systems and in community health workers, among other health workers. But we have to also be very conscious of the fact that we need to focus on resilience and on preparedness for future crises, whether it takes the form of climate disasters, epidemics, other forms of crises. And so in a sense, this tragedy, this global tragedy, can present an opportunity to improve conditions. And one of the things we're going to be looking at also is the whole issue of leave periods, rest periods, also career development. What sort of supervision can community health workers count on for to improve the quality of your services, to safeguard your interests and provide for greater safety in carrying out your work? And what opportunities can be provided to develop your careers, to develop your skills, and perspectives for advancement. So that is just, I wanted to mention that that's something that we're going to be also looking at in the context of this study. And we look forward to future opportunities to hear from you, to express, you know, in the general survey that we're going to be preparing, some of your experiences, the challenges you face, because while we have this opportunity, I want to just refer back to what Anand Grover stated. And as a former civil rights lawyer in the private sector for many years before joining the ILO, you know, there are many, your demands are reasonable. They are obviously need to be addressed, but they may require a fight. So in that sense, the ILO, I think, has a lot of tools that you can use to support you in that fight. With that, and many thanks, I just would turn to Cristina Campayo, my team member, who's going to be working on she's already started, we have already started working on the decent work for care economy workers. Cristina, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else about the work that we're doing, because I'm sure that in the short time I've left things out. No te escucho.
Now, yeah, only just to thank for the participation, because it was very interesting for our work. And I think for you, as Anna said, to be used as a tool to your voice to be here. So I invite you to send reports through your unions so we can take note of all your demands and all the struggles you are facing right now. And thank you very much for the participation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Anna and Christina. Certainly, PSI will accept the invitation to participate in the review, and we will work with all of the community health workers unions to make sure that their voice is heard at the international level, which is part of this campaign. We really want to try and amplify the voice of the workers that I think are really not getting the global attention that they deserve, that they need. It may not be very well known globally that, in fact, all of our health is, all of our future sort of health and resilience is dependent on the work, unpaid work of women community health workers. And so this opportunity at the ILO is an important one. We will also be trying to ensure other global institutions can receive these demands and hear them and respond to them. You know, those institutions, for example, that provide funding to governments, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, some of whom are funding some of these countries, but channeling those funds to the private sector. Which undermines the capacity to pay the women who are doing the primary health work that's so critical now and into the future. We will take questions if anybody would like to ask a question of any of the speakers now. Happy to hand over the floor to anybody if you'd like to put your hand up. I did have a couple of questions sent through. And the first one was around whether any of the unions have been involved in policy. We mentioned earlier that one of the demands is for the community health workers to have the right to social dialogue. And one question that's come through is, have any of the community health workers unions been involved in COVID policy? Perhaps I'll start with that one, and we'll also hand over to anybody that would like to put their hand up for another question. So could I ask, perhaps I can start with a response from India around whether you've been involved with COVID policy making on behalf of the union. I don't hear a response. Perhaps I can move to Sister Halima in Pakistan. Sister Halima, are you able to take that question?
Yes, sister.
Right. Can you tell us whether you've been
यहाँ पे मैंने जो है क्वेश्चन के लिए हाथ रेज जो किया था, असल में मेरा मकसद ये था, उसमें मेरा मकसद ये है कि मेरी बहनें जिन्होंने
Sorry, I'm
पहले
not
तो मैं
getting the
आनंद भाई
English
की शुक्रगुजार हूँ
response yet.
कि उन्होंने
Can our Urdu interpreter here? Okay, sorry. So if you could help us, that would be helpful.
Okay.
Sister Halima, if you could go ahead.
I am here. I raise my hand. Whatever from India and Nepal, our sister, I have to make sure they. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear the interpretation.
I have to encourage them, our sister. In Pakistan, there are issues. Whatever we face, I have left my one leg. I have lost my one leg. We have achieved a lot of things, and we have to do other thing. When our union has been registered, then our government is listening carefully to us, and they are solving our problem, and our wages is good, and we have claimed our area also.
हो गई है, हमारे अलाउंसेस हो गए, तो ये
it was given only 20 days, but now it is more than 20 days. When violence have been occurred more often, and a lot of women has been taken back, and but when the people who struggle, who join us with our struggle, I have to salute them, and and I have to encourage my sister from Nepal and that they will get the things whatever they demand.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sister Halima. I know that the workers in Nepal and India have been very inspired by the struggle of community health workers in Pakistan. I can see that there's a question from Abha. If we can go ahead with that question, hand over to you, Abha.
आभा जी आप म्यूट पे हो.
Abha Chaturvedi, do you have your hand up for a question?
Yes.
Okay, over to you.
आवाज आ रही है?
बिल्कुल आ रही है.
Okay. My name
Yes,
is Abha
yes.
Chaturvedi. I am here on behalf of Hind Mahila. और मैं यहाँ पर एज ए ऑर्गेनाइजेशन लीडर मैं हेल्थ वर्कर के साथ पिछले 3 साल से काम कर रही हूँ.
Sorry, just one moment. Just one moment. I think our interpreter, Urdu interpreter, we need you to mute now. Okay.
Hello.
So go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. मैं यहाँ पर हिंद महिला सभा के बिहाफ पर हेल्थ वर्कर्स के साथ पिछले 3 सालों से काम कर रही हूँ और इंडिया में उत्तर प्रदेश सबसे बिगेस्ट स्टेट है 29 स्टेट में से और पूरे ऑल ओवर उत्तर प्रदेश में 1,30,000 आशा वर्कर्स काम कर रही हैं. इसलिए मैं आशा वर्कर्स कह रही हूँ क्योंकि यहाँ की गवर्नमेंट उनको आशा बहू कहती है. आधा तो उनको मोबिलाइजिंग आशा बहू के नाम से हो जाता है. अभी मैं पाकिस्तान की सिस्टर का सुन रही थी, बहुत बेहतर स्थिति में है हमारे इंडिया से और इतनी बड़ी संख्या आशा वर्कर्स काम करने के बावजूद स्पेशली कोविड-19 में उन्होंने जिस तरह से सेक्रीफाइस किया अपनी पर्सनल लाइफ को, अपनी फैमिली को ओनली फॉर सोसाइटी और उसके बाद भी उनको जो इकोनॉमिक रिस्पांस मिलना चाहिए वो नहीं मिला. मेरा ये एक रिक्वेस्ट है थ्रू ILO इंडिया गवर्नमेंट भारत सरकार इकोनॉमिक पॉलिसी में हेल्थ वर्कर से एक मेंबर को डिप्यूट करना चाहिए ताकि वो उनके इकोनॉमिक कंडीशन को टॉप टू बॉटम रख सकें. ये मेरा स्पेशली मेरा एक रिक्वेस्ट है क्योंकि कोई भी पॉलिटिकल बैकग्राउंड भारत में हेल्थ वर्कर के लिए संघर्ष नहीं कर रही हैं. इसलिए ये PSI को मैं स्पेशली थैंक यू बोलूंगी कि इस समय PSI ने इस तरह से इनको सपोर्ट किया है कि आज उत्तर प्रदेश की 80% आशा वर्कर्स हमारे ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के थ्रू PSI के साथ खड़ी हैं और उनको ये महसूस हो रहा है कि PSI पब्लिक सर्विस इंटरनेशनल हमारे लिए एज ए अम्ब्रेला का काम कर रहा है. और यही मेरी गुजारिश है कि इकोनॉमिक पोजीशन इनकी इतनी स्ट्रांग हो तो उसके आगे भी इनको दूसरा पॉइंट रिस्पेक्ट, इक्वल वर्क इक्वल पे एंड रिस्पेक्ट, 2 थिंग इज मोर इम्पोर्टेंट फॉर हेल्थ कम्युनिटी हेल्थ वर्कर्स. थैंक यू मैडम.
Thank you, Sister Abha. That's I think a very important contribution, and we really appreciate the support. And hopefully, you know, this campaign will bring more power to your work in Uttar Pradesh. I see another hand up. Shahid?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead, please.
No. Yes. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Are you listening?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, please.
Yes, sir. Can I speak in Urdu? I'm very happy to attend this conference, and I want to say कि पाकिस्तान के अंदर जो तहरीक चलाई हमारी ख़वातीन लेडी हेल्थ,
I wanted to say that whatever
और बहुत काबिशें हैं, खासकर मैं अपनी सिस्टर हलीमा को
and especially
पाकिस्तान में, तो अभी जो बात हो रही है कि तमाम साउथ एशिया के अंदर जो मसाइल हैं हमारे लेडी हेल्थ वर्कर्स के, उनको हल करने के लिए जो स्ट्रगल की गई है इन खवातीन की जानिब से, देखें ना कि खवातीन जो है वो मर्दों के निस्बत कुछ कम,
these women as well, as we all know that some of the women are perceived to be less powerful than men, and they also do all the house shows, they bring up the children. But I congratulate all the lady health workers in Pakistan and as well as others, and through their conversation we have understood that if they continue to struggle, they can achieve their goals. I have two questions. In India, and Pakistan, the situation and the problems faced by the lady health workers in both the countries are similar. ILO should make conventions to protect them, to protect their rights. There must be some conventions that there is an impression until and unless they would go on the streets and get baton charged, they are not heard. We have to go global. We have to see the picture on a bigger canvas. And those who are supporting them are doing a commendable work. We need to analyze so far what we have achieved and what we have to achieve in the future. We must send this voice to people in all parts of the world using media. And we will do our best to ensure this. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. I'll just see if there are any other hands up, any questions before we have a final comment from any of the workers. Prakash, Brother Prakash, I think I see your hand up. Go ahead. You're muted, Brother Prakash, if you could unmute.
रिप्रेझेंट करतो. आम्ही खूप लढलोय, जवळजवळ
we are working since 30 years. They told us that we are the workers of Municipal Corporation of Bombay. They appealed in the Mumbai High Court, and that case went on for 14 years. After 14 years, in the Industrial Tribunal, they declared that we are workers. After that, Mumbai Municipal Corporation has appealed in the Supreme Court. So, in a judicial level, whatever is going on, that's year after year, a lot of high-level judges have died also while this case was going on. It is very clear that
where are the human rights workers? Where is the human rights? And that is why we say that. And the Bombay Municipal Corporation is the biggest corporation in the Asian continent. They spend 5,000 crores of rupees. 5,000 crores of rupees. These CHVs have worked against the COVID-19 in Mumbai. They controlled it. They own against the wish of the family. They went in the field and they done a lot of work. It is a very bad situation for that no political party is also looking at this, and therefore we are now we are on 17 December. We will be before the residence of Chief Minister Uddhavji Thackeray at आणि धरणे धरणार आहोत आणि I will ask him, because when we met on 30th October, when we met him at the his Varsha residence, he told that minimum wages should be given. But the commissioner and the other people are all avoiding to pay minimum wages, maternity leave, fund of pension and all, because they just say because appeal is pending for in the Supreme Court, we can't do anything. That this is not the humanity. This is against the humanity. And I think that Chief Minister Uddhav Thackeray and Prime Minister also approached. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has not also taken any cognizance in this. This is what he says, that women should be given all the facilities, but he has not done anything for this. And I think that this is a very, very worst situation for the women in Mumbai. All are women workers here, and there are now a lot of deaths in COVID fighting. There are also there are deaths about the confinement and pregnancy, etc., because they were asked to go for 4 or 5 floors to meet the people. This is where the PSI also is required to take. The ILO, which speaks about the labor standards and all, I don't think this ILO has taken any cognizance of the community health workers. This is, I see my learned friend Anand Grover, who, but I think that this should be taken seriously, and it should be an Indian movement. It should be an Indian movement for the community health workers, to get them, make them employee, give them all protection, and therefore I think that I thank PSI for doing all this, making this press conference, and this will be a very good move to unite all. Thank you.
Great. Excellent. Thank you, Brother Prakash. I think those comments are noted. I can see some fists up from some of the participants in this press conference. And for those who are interested, the legal struggle that Brother Prakash mentioned, some of that information is on the PSI website, and of course we can provide more information about what is an important win, but the fact that it took 14 years is way too long. So as was mentioned by a previous speaker, really the struggle can't be simply a drawn out legal battle. It needs to be one of strength and solidarity. I have a note here from Anna just to mention that importantly, the ILO's work will also look at, of course, in addition to the fundamental rights at work, they'll be looking to the issues of stress and the work that health workers have had to take on in the context of the pandemic. So that'll be an important part of their mental health, the mental health of health workers. I think we have gone over time and I apologise for that. There's been a lot of important information to share. I'm just going to ask Rosa if she'd like to make any final comments before we finish this, but just also to say that we have been recording. Each of the workers who have spoken have prepared some comments that can be shared about that they prepared in the lead up to this press conference, as well as the demands. We have a short list as well as a longer list of demands that can be provided, and we'd be happy to share those with everybody here. And of course, also if anybody would like to follow up with individual interviews, PSI is happy to support that and provide interpreters if required. So now I'll just finally hand back over to Rosa for closing comments.
Yeah, thank you very much to all of you participating, and particularly to our colleagues, community health workers, for their direct contribution, for shining a light on their living and working conditions. There's a lot of work that we still need to do there, and it's good that ILO is on board. But I would like to say two things. The first is that, yes, we need to fight to reduce the pay gap, gender pay gap in the world of work. But when we talk about community health workers, the priority is to get them a pay, because in most, as we heard, most of them are not even having a minimum wage or a wage that is considered enough to be on over the threshold of poverty. The second is that we contributed to many of the regulations adopted by the ILO conventions. I'm thinking, for instance, the recommendation on the guidelines for emergency workers, the convention and recommendation on Convention 190 on eradicating violence from the world of work, where we also committed to include volunteers, as we really believe that justice can be achieved only if it is based on human rights for all. But in this case, we need to overcome the concept that these workers are volunteers. These workers have a program that they have to fill. They have reports that they have to send back to authorities. They have, real tasks to fill in the healthcare system. And this is something that we need to consider, to say clearly that they are not volunteer, they are workers. And I don't think that, the philanthropic system or the private system can be the response to that. We clearly need the role of the public. As I said at the beginning, community health workers are resources on which the entire health system, starting from the World Health Organization, rely on. as there's not enough doctors, as there's not enough nurses, as pandemic are becoming or epidemic are becoming recurrent in our world, having strong primary care networks, primary care system is the first response. And this has to be considered in all the policies that we are going to adopt. In that sense, we all want to contribute also to the reviewing process of Convention 149 and the recommendation on nursing. The world has changed, the profession has changed. Nursing is not what it was 50 years ago, 40 years ago. We need now to update to the new challenges, but also to the new skills that are required for workers in the health system. And last thing I would like to say is that I very much welcome the proposal that our colleagues and our staff, starting from Kate and all the other PSI staff in the Asian region, have decided launching this campaign. We started with experience in different countries, little by little, building knowledge, building capacity to organize, building capacity to bringing women together and being more effective in presenting their claim. The fact that there is now the idea of a broader campaign, sub-regional campaign in South Asia is really promising to bring at global level the claims that we have just, the demands that we have just presented. And for our colleagues in the ILO, for the media, and for also our colleagues in your region, I think it's important to know that we are now moving to have a similar campaign, similar projects, and organizing a project in Africa to address the issue, as this is part of the response that we need to give to strengthen the health system globally. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosa. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and particularly thanks to our colleagues Banani Decker, who has taken the lead on this campaign, Trimita organising, Susanna Cannon, and Jenny in Nepal. So if anybody would like to follow up, all of our colleagues are available to support this campaign, and we're also able to facilitate interviews and conversations with workers, and we'll be in touch with the recording and follow-up elements to the campaign. We would like to invite anybody to support the campaign as we move. This is the first step in an ongoing number of events that will take place over the following months. So thank you again to everybody, and we'll be in touch.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Finished.